The morning was unnervingly still, the kind of silence that carried more weight than comfort. Officer Virgil Ashford walked slowly along the forest path, the damp soil muffling the sound of his boots. At his side trotted Grit, the German shepherd who had been his partner for years, the one presence he trusted without hesitation. The air was thick with the smell of wet bark and moss, but beneath it lingered something metallic, faint and unsettling. Grit's nose twitched, his ears rising sharply. He stopped, tail stiff, and let out a low growl that rippled through the stillness like a warning. Virgil followed his partner's gaze, and his breath caught. In front of them loomed an old oak, massive and scarred by time. At its center bulged a grotesque swelling of bark, a knot so large it seemed unnatural. Sap oozed down its rough surface in long, sticky trails, dark and glistening like blood turned to resin. Virgil had seen his share of strange things during late-night patrols, but something about this tree felt wrong. The knot didn't look like disease or storm damage. It looked intentional, like something sealed inside. Grit barked fiercely now, teeth bared, pulling at the leash as if he wanted to attack the tree itself. Virgil tightened his grip on the handle, steadying the dog with a stern voice, but his own pulse betrayed him, pounding in his throat. He stepped closer, compelled by both duty and an unease he couldn't shake. The closer he got, the more the sap's odor invaded his senses, sweet, cloying, almost suffocating. It made him dizzy for a moment, and he had to steady himself against the rough bark. The knot seemed to breathe. That was the only way Virgil could describe it. Standing there, watching the thick sap slide downward, he felt as though the tree's surface was subtly rising and falling, alive with some slow, hidden pulse. He blinked hard, telling himself it was only his imagination. Yet Grit snarled again, louder this time, the sound vibrating deep in his chest. The dog knew something Virgil couldn't explain. Instinct battled reason in Virgil's mind. He was a man of facts, not fables. Still, he couldn't turn away. His hand slipped to the hunting knife at his belt, a precaution he rarely used on patrol but suddenly felt necessary. The blade glinted faintly as he drew it, the cold steel reflecting the dim light filtering through the canopy. For a brief second, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Even the wind stilled, as though waiting. Virgil raised the knife and pressed it lightly against the surface of the knot. The bark felt strangely soft under the blade, like flesh instead of wood. Grit barked sharply, pulling so hard on the leash that Virgil stumbled forward. And just then, from deep within the oak, came a muffled sound, low, guttural, and unmistakably human. For a long moment, Virgil Ashford stood frozen, the knife pressed against the pulsing knot of wood, his ears straining to make sense of the sound. The muffled noise came again, faint but deliberate, something between a moan and a cry. His skin prickled, every instinct urging him to back away, but his duty anchored him in place. Grit barked furiously, lunging toward the tree, as if desperate to dig into the wood and uncover what lay hidden. The dog's sharp growls mixed with the eerie stillness, creating an unbearable tension that seemed to tighten around Virgil's chest. He stepped back, trying to breathe evenly. His eyes scanned the surrounding forest, half expecting someone to emerge from the shadows, but nothing stirred. "Hello?" he called out, voice low but firm, his words trembling with uncertainty. There was no answer, only that sickly sweet odor seeping from the tree and the oppressive silence that followed. Yet he couldn't deny what he'd heard. Someone or something was inside. The thought was impossible, absurd, yet the evidence clawed at his reason. Virgil crouched down to examine the base of the tree. The sap clung to his gloves in sticky threads, glimmering faintly like amber but reeking of iron. He pressed his ear closer to the knot. At first, there was nothing but the faint rustle of leaves overhead. Then it came again, a weak, dragging breath, so close it felt like it vibrated through the bark. He jerked back, his heart hammering wildly. The sound was alive. Grit's barking escalated into frantic yelps, the dog pawing at the tree with a desperation Virgil had never seen before. His partner wasn't simply reacting. He was trying to warn him. Virgil tightened his grip on the knife and swallowed hard. He wasn't prepared for this. Training taught him how to confront criminals, not haunted trees bleeding sap and whispering like graves. Yet something in him, a mix of fear and duty, pushed him forward. He couldn't leave this unexplored. Slowly, he pressed the blade deeper into the knot. The bark gave way easier than he expected, the wood splitting with a wet, tearing sound that made his stomach churn. A surge of darker sap oozed out, trailing down the trunk in thick rivulets. The smell intensified, sharp and metallic, forcing Virgil to turn his head away. Still, he continued, sawing through layers that felt less like wood and more like tissue. Grit's growls rose to a fever pitch, echoing through the trees like a warning siren. Then, just as the knife cut deeper, the sound from within grew clearer. A voice, hoarse, ragged, unmistakably human. "Help me!" The single plea sliced through Virgil's rational mind, leaving him reeling. His breath caught, and for the first time in years, fear overtook his training. Someone was trapped inside that ancient oak. And the question that sent a shiver down his spine was not how they got there, but why. The plea echoed in Virgil Ashford's mind, chilling him to the bone. "Help me." Two simple words, yet impossible in their implications. His hand trembled as he kept the knife pressed against the wood, the sticky resin coating the blade like coagulated blood. Grit circled the base of the tree, barking furiously, his claws raking at the dirt in a frenzy. The forest seemed to close in around them, every rustle of leaves carrying the weight of unseen eyes. Virgil swallowed hard, trying to convince himself this was real, not some hallucination born of exhaustion. But he knew better. The voice was real. He leaned closer to the opening he had started, forcing himself to speak again. "Who's in there? Can you hear me?" His words were steady, though his heart thundered against his ribs. For a few moments there was nothing, no reply, no sound but Grit's growls. Then faintly came a shallow rasp. It was not a full answer, not coherent, but enough to confirm what his instincts screamed. A living being was trapped inside this ancient oak. The impossibility of it pressed down on him like a weight. Virgil worked the knife deeper, slicing through layers of wood that peeled away in chunks, sticky with resin. Each cut released more of that sickly sweet stench, burning his nostrils and clinging to his throat. His gloves grew slick, his breathing ragged as he fought the urge to gag. Still, he pressed on, driven by a mixture of dread and determination. The knot was no ordinary growth. It resisted like flesh fighting against intrusion. Sweat dripped into his eyes, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Suddenly, the tree shuddered under his hands, as though alive, and Virgil stumbled back. He froze, staring at the gash he had carved. The sap pulsed outward in thick waves, spilling onto the forest floor in a crimson tide. Grit let out a deep, guttural snarl, teeth bared as he positioned himself protectively between Virgil and the tree. Virgil's knuckles whitened around the handle of the knife. For the first time in his career, he hesitated, caught between the instinct to run and the duty to confront what was before him. Then it came again, clearer this time. A voice, raspy and broken but undeniable. "Please, open it." The words were desperate, soaked with suffering. Virgil felt his stomach twist. Whoever was inside had been there for a long time. Maybe too long. He knew he should call for backup, but the thought of explaining this, of telling anyone what he had discovered, felt absurd. Who would believe him? He steadied himself, wiping the sweat from his brow with the back of his sleeve. His decision crystallized in that moment. Whether this was madness or miracle, he would not abandon the voice calling from within. He raised the knife again, this time with both hands, and drove the blade deeper into the knot. The tree groaned like a living thing, and as the wood split wider, a cold draft poured out, air from a hollow that had been sealed for decades. Grit barked wildly, his body tense, as though he knew that whatever was about to emerge would change everything. The opening widened with every strike of Virgil Ashford's knife, splinters flying as the thick bark surrendered in jagged pieces. The tree groaned with each cut, a sound so unnatural it made his skin crawl. Grit barked furiously, lunging toward the hollow as if urging Virgil to hurry, though his growls carried both fear and defiance. At last, with one final thrust, the blade pierced through into an emptiness that resonated like striking bone. The knot split open, and a rush of stale, icy air spilled out, carrying with it a stench of decay that forced Virgil to stagger backward. For a moment, he simply stared at the dark hollow. The opening gaped like a wound, dripping with sap that glistened red in the dim light. His breathing turned shallow, the metallic taste of fear thick on his tongue. Slowly, he leaned closer, shining the narrow beam of his flashlight into the void. What he saw made his blood run cold. Inside, pressed against the inner walls of the oak, was something human-shaped. Skin stretched thin, pale as wax, fused into the wood as though the tree itself had consumed it. The figure's chest rose ever so slightly, confirming life where there should have been none. Virgil's grip tightened around the flashlight, his mind racing for explanation. A person inside a tree? It was impossible, grotesque, yet undeniable before his eyes. The face was sunken, eyes shut tight, lips barely parting with a faint wheeze. "Help, please," the figure whispered, the words so weak they dissolved into the stale air. Grit whined now, lowering his bark to a mournful cry, sensing the agony before them. Virgil's instinct was to drag the figure out, but the sight stopped him. The body wasn't simply trapped, it was intertwined with the wood. Roots wound around the figure's arms and legs like veins, holding it fast in a prison of bark and sap. To pull recklessly might mean killing the very person he was trying to save. His hands shook as he pressed his radio, but he hesitated. How could he explain this without sounding insane? What if reinforcements delayed, and the figure slipped away before his eyes? He leaned closer, speaking softly. "I'll get you out. Just hold on." His voice cracked with a mixture of determination and fear. The figure's eyes fluttered open for a fraction of a second, pupils clouded but unmistakably human, and Virgil felt an icy dread crawl up his spine. Whoever this was had been trapped here for far longer than anyone could endure. Yet they were alive against every law of nature. The forest around him grew silent again, unervingly still. Virgil pulled his knife free from the bark and prepared to cut deeper, to free the stranger from the oak's suffocating grip. But before the blade touched the wood again, the figure's lips moved once more, whispering something that froze Virgil in place. "Don't let it out." The words struck Virgil Ashford like a blow. "Don't let it out." His hand froze midair, the knife hovering just above the bark. His breath came in ragged bursts, his heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst through his chest. He glanced at Grit, who stood rigid, hackles raised, growling low as if echoing the same warning. The air grew heavy, oppressive, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. Virgil couldn't reconcile the contradiction. This figure begged for help, yet in the same breath begged to be kept sealed away. The face in the hollow twitched with the effort of speaking again. "It's not me. The tree. It feeds." The words came broken, strangled by weakness, but they carried a weight that cut through Virgil's resolve. He staggered back a step, gripping the knife so tightly his knuckles turned white. Grit barked sharply, pulling at the leash, his body leaning away from the oak. The dog's instincts screamed of danger, and Virgil, for the first time, considered that freeing this stranger might unleash something neither of them could control. Still, the sight of the figure, skin pale, body fused into bark, chest rising in fragile rhythm, tore at him. Every law of duty demanded he save a life. He had sworn to protect, to act. But what if protecting this life meant endangering countless others? His thoughts spiraled, colliding with one another, his training offering no guide for such a choice. Sweat beaded on his brow as he weighed the knife in his hand. One more cut could set the figure free, or break the barrier holding back something far worse. Virgil lowered the flashlight again, forcing himself to study the scene. The roots wrapped around the figure pulsed faintly, as though the tree was siphoning the life out of its prisoner. With each breath the figure took, the bark tightened, absorbing strength from its captive. Virgil shuddered at the realization. The tree wasn't simply a prison. It was a predator. The figure's warning now rang louder in his mind, amplified by the unnatural stillness that surrounded them. The man's lips parted once more, barely audible. "It wakes when cut." His eyes flickered open, glazed and unblinking, and Virgil felt a surge of icy dread. He looked at his blade, at the jagged wound he had already carved into the oak, and a terrifying thought rooted itself in his mind. Had he already awakened whatever the tree was hiding? The forest seemed darker now, the shadows deeper, the silence pressing against his ears. Virgil staggered back, his breath uneven. Grit's growls rose, sharp and urgent, pulling him farther from the hollow. For the first time since the nightmare began, Virgil considered retreat. Yet as he turned, a sound erupted from deep within the tree, a low, guttural rumble that shook the ground beneath his boots. The figure in the hollow let out a final whisper, trembling and broken. Too late. The rumble deep inside the oak grew louder, vibrating through the ground like the growl of something buried alive. Virgil Ashford braced himself, his pulse hammering in his throat. The jagged wound in the bark widened on its own, splitting further with sharp cracks that echoed through the forest. Thick resin oozed in torrents now, dark and heavy, soaking the soil around his boots. Beside him, Grit barked wildly, snapping at the air as though fighting an enemy that hadn't yet revealed itself. Virgil raised his flashlight again, shining it into the hollow, and nearly dropped it at what he saw. The figure pressed inside the wood thrashed weakly, its body convulsing against the roots that held it. But it wasn't only the prisoner that moved. The tree itself seemed to writhe, bark shifting like muscle beneath skin. The roots curled tighter around the figure's limbs, pulling with a grotesque strength, as if the oak was awakening and refusing to give up its prey. Virgil's knife felt pitifully small against something so monstrous. The prisoner's face contorted, lips trembling as another whisper escaped. "It knows. You cut it." Virgil's throat tightened. His hands shook, the blade slick with resin. He glanced at Grit, who lunged again toward the trunk, snarling with ferocity. Every instinct told Virgil to flee, but duty bound him to stand his ground. The impossible was happening before his eyes. The forest wasn't merely alive with plants and animals. Something darker, ancient, was stirring. Then the sound shifted. From inside the hollow came a low, resonant hum that didn't belong to any human throat. It reverberated through Virgil's chest, unsettling his heartbeat, and grew steadily louder until it became a chorus of overlapping voices. Male, female, child, all speaking at once in a tone so deep it rattled his bones. Virgil staggered back, covering his ears, but the sound was inside him now, vibrating through marrow and mind. Grit whimpered, ears pinned flat, yet still refused to abandon his post. Virgil shouted over the din, desperate to ground himself. "Who are you? What do you want?" His words were swallowed by the cacophony, yet for a brief instant, the many voices seemed to answer in unison. "We feed." The bark split wider, and Virgil saw shapes within the wood. Faces, distorted and screaming, woven into the grain like tortured carvings. The prisoner in the hollow cried out weakly, the sound drowned beneath the chorus. Virgil's stomach turned as he realized the truth. This tree had held many before, their essence bound into its core. The forest erupted then. Birds scattered in a frenzy overhead, the canopy shaking as if a storm had torn through. The ground quivered beneath Virgil's boots, cracks racing outward from the oak's roots. He stumbled, gripping Grit's leash, knowing he could no longer deny what was happening. The tree wasn't just a prison or a predator. It was waking, and Virgil was standing at its threshold. The ground trembled under Virgil Ashford's boots as the oak groaned like a living beast. He yanked Grit's leash, pulling the dog closer, his instincts torn between escape and confrontation. Just as the rumbling subsided into a low, guttural hum, the beam of a flashlight cut through the shadows behind him. Virgil spun, knife raised, only to see a figure emerge from the trees. It was Eliza Thornton, the town's botanist, her pale face lit with alarm. She had heard the commotion from the road and followed the echoes, though nothing could have prepared her for the sight of the hollow. "Dear God," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes locked on the figure imprisoned in the oak, the roots pulsing around its limbs. "You shouldn't have opened it, Virgil. You don't know what you've done." Her words carried fear but also knowledge, as though she had expected something like this might happen. Virgil, shaken and desperate for answers, demanded, "Then tell me what the hell this is." Before Eliza could respond, another voice rasped from the shadows. Cyrus Beckett, the reclusive elder who rarely left his farmhouse, stepped forward, leaning heavily on a cane. His face was etched with deep lines, his eyes glinting with something between dread and grim recognition. "I told them years ago," Cyrus muttered, his voice gravelly. "That tree should have been cut down long before now. But no one listened. No one ever listens." He stopped short of the oak, his cane trembling against the soil. "It's not a tree, officer. It's a vessel." Virgil's throat tightened. Vessel. The word clung to him like a curse. He turned back to the hollow, where the prisoner's eyes fluttered open, cloudy and full of suffering. Eliza stepped closer, her voice urgent. "Don't free him. If you do, you won't just release him, you'll release them." Virgil's chest tightened at her emphasis, the memory of the many voices from within the bark still rattling through his skull. He wanted to demand more, but the forest itself seemed to conspire against them, branches swaying without wind, leaves whispering in an unholy rhythm. Cyrus's gaze burned into Virgil's. "I've seen it before. My father told me of the last time it woke. Whole families gone. Their faces appeared in the wood, same as those you saw tonight. That oak doesn't just feed, it harvests." His words were laced with despair, and for the first time, Virgil saw terror in the eyes of a man who had lived through war and loss. Grit barked sharply, pulling at the leash, as if warning them all to leave while they still could. But leaving wasn't an option anymore. The ground cracked again beneath the oak, and from deep within came a sound unlike any before. Not a voice, but a scream long and piercing, as though hundreds of souls cried out at once. Eliza clutched Virgil's arm, her eyes wide with horror. "It knows we're here," she said, her voice breaking, and Virgil, staring into the gaping hollow, knew she was right. The tree had awakened fully, and now it was watching them. The scream from the oak lingered in the night air long after it ended, vibrating through the forest like an echo that refused to die. Virgil Ashford gritted his teeth, every nerve in his body urging him to retreat. But his boots felt rooted to the earth, unwilling to abandon the prisoner fused into the bark. Beside him, Grit snarled low, his body rigid, torn between lunging at the tree and fleeing from it. The dog's instincts mirrored Virgil's inner conflict, fight or run. Eliza Thornton clutched her flashlight, her knuckles pale. "This is how it starts," she whispered. "It calls, it feeds, and then it spreads." Her voice cracked with a mixture of fear and certainty. She had studied strange growths, ancient fungi, parasitic roots, but nothing like this. This was not science. It was something older, something that defied all her training. Her eyes flicked toward Virgil. "You need to seal it back before it's too late." But the gash was already too wide, the hollow exposed like a festering wound. Cyrus Beckett planted his cane firmly in the ground, his voice carrying a grim finality. "Seal it? That can't be done. Not once it wakes. The only thing that keeps it contained is fear itself. That's why the stories were passed down, why people kept away from this part of the woods. But you," he jabbed a finger toward Virgil, "you cut it open. You broke the pact." His words hung heavy, laced with accusation and despair. Virgil clenched his jaw, refusing to let guilt paralyze him. He hadn't come here seeking legends. He had come because something had called to him, through grit, through the silence of the forest. The prisoner inside the hollow moaned weakly, their face gaunt and twisted in pain. "It's hungry," they rasped, their voice rasping like dry leaves. Virgil felt a chill crawl up his spine as he watched the roots pulse tighter, sap spilling in thick streams at the figure's sides. The air grew colder, each breath burning in his lungs. He knew instinctively that if he turned and left now, the oak would not simply go back to sleep. Its hunger was awake, and it would not stop at one. The forest began to shift around them. Branches snapped overhead, though no wind blew. The soil beneath their feet cracked open in small fissures, roots snaking outward like veins in search of new prey. Grit lunged against the leash, barking furiously as the ground rippled beneath him. Eliza stumbled back, nearly falling, her flashlight beam shaking across the monstrous trunk. Cyrus stood firm, though his face blanched, his eyes reflecting the terror he had hoped never to see again. Virgil raised his knife, though deep down he knew it was a useless gesture. This was no criminal, no wild animal. This was something older, something vast, something that had been waiting for generations. The prisoner's eyes met his, wide and desperate, as another whisper forced its way out, "Run!" But Virgil couldn't, because for the first time he realized the truth. If they ran, the oak wouldn't stay confined to this forest. It would follow, and it would feed. The forest erupted in chaos. The oak split wider, bark tearing with a thunderous crack that echoed like gunfire. Resin poured out in a torrent, glistening black under the flashlight beams. Virgil Ashford staggered backward, dragging Grit with him as the dog barked madly at the opening. From within the hollow came the sound of countless voices, screaming in unison, a chorus of agony and hunger. The figure bound inside thrashed violently, their face contorted in both pain and warning, as though begging Virgil to end it before the tree fully consumed them. Eliza Thornton fell to her knees, clutching her head, the voices piercing her skull. "It's too late," she cried, her voice breaking. "It's awake now. Nothing will put it back to sleep." Her flashlight dropped, rolling across the soil, its beam cutting jagged light across the gnarled roots. Virgil's instinct screamed for him to run, but another instinct, the one that had kept him alive through years of service, told him the only way out was through. He couldn't leave it. He had to face it. Cyrus Beckett slammed his cane into the ground, shouting over the din, "You can't fight it. No blade, no fire, it only grows stronger. The only thing it fears is recognition. That's why it hides in legends, why it buries itself in whispers." His eyes burned as he turned to Virgil. But once it shows itself, once it takes, it won't stop until it has the town, maybe more. His words struck Virgil harder than the roar of the oak. For the first time, he saw not just fear in Cyrus's eyes, but surrender. The prisoner's eyes flew open, wide and pleading. "Kill me!" they rasped, voice torn with desperation. "If I stay, it stays chained. If I go free, it spreads." Virgil's chest tightened, his heart tearing in two. This was no simple rescue. This was a choice that would define everything, between mercy for one and salvation for many. His knife felt impossibly heavy, his hand trembling as the screams of the oak swelled louder, the ground buckling beneath them. Grit lunged forward, teeth bared, as if urging his master to decide. Virgil's mind raced. His oath to protect life, his fear of unleashing something beyond comprehension, his unwillingness to carry the weight of an entire town's destruction. Eliza's sobs filled the air, Cyrus's voice broke into prayer, and still the prisoner's plea echoed above it all. "Kill me before it's too late." The oak's hollow widened further, faces pressing against the bark, hundreds of them, mouths open in eternal screams. A blast of icy air surged outward, knocking Virgil to his knees. He raised his knife, sweat streaming down his face, as the prisoner met his gaze with hollow eyes. The tree roared like a beast unchained, the forest trembling under its awakening. And Virgil knew, whatever he chose in the next moment would decide whether the world outside these woods would ever be safe again. The knife shook in Virgil Ashford's grip, the steel glinting in the erratic light of the fallen flashlight. Around him, the forest convulsed as the oak's roar grew louder, roots lashing outward like serpents clawing at the earth. Grit barked ferociously, straining against the leash, his body taut with desperation. Virgil's pulse thundered in his ears, drowning out everything except the prisoner's words. Kill me before it spreads. Every fiber of his being rebelled against the idea, but the truth blazed in front of him. The figure was the last barrier keeping this horror contained. Eliza Thornton sobbed openly, clutching her arms around herself. Virgil, you have to do something. If you free him, we all die. Her voice cracked, her fear palpable. Beside her, Cyrus Beckett raised his trembling hand, eyes glistening with painful acceptance. Your choice decides everything, boy. Don't think of him. Think of everyone else. The words were a sentence, heavy and final. Virgil's chest tightened. In all his years as an officer, he had never faced a choice so merciless. Duty meant saving lives, but now saving one would mean destroying many. The prisoner's eyes locked onto Virgil's, filled with agony yet strangely calm, as if accepting their fate. Their lips moved again, whispering, "Please, don't let it out." The words weren't just a plea. They were a release, a surrender. Virgil's hand steadied as the realization crystallized inside him. This wasn't about killing an innocent. This was about sacrifice, an unthinkable burden placed on someone who had carried it too long. He had to end it. With a guttural cry, Virgil drove the blade forward, piercing deep into the prisoner's chest. The body convulsed, the roots tightening in a final spasm before recoiling violently. A scream erupted from the oak, not of one voice but of hundreds, shrieking in fury as their anchor was severed. The ground quaked, fissures splitting outward, and resin gushed like black blood. Virgil braced himself, holding Grit close, as the forest shook with the oak's death throes. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, silence. The oak sagged inward, its hollow collapsing, bark folding in on itself like a closing wound. The prisoner's face slackened, peaceful at last, before vanishing entirely as the tree sealed shut. The air grew still, the oppressive weight lifting from the forest. Virgil fell to his knees, his chest heaving, the knife slipping from his trembling hand. Grit pressed against him, whining softly, as if sensing the heavy toll his master had paid. Eliza wiped her tears, her voice hoarse. "You saved us. But at what cost?" Cyrus only shook his head, his cane sinking into the soil. "The cost is memory," he muttered. "Never forget, or it will grow again." Virgil rose slowly, staring at the oak, now silent, but scarred with the faint outlines of faces buried deep within. He knew the town would never hear this story, and maybe that was for the best. Some truths were too heavy to carry into the light. As he led Grit away from the clearing, the forest remained hushed, as if mourning. Virgil didn't look back. Some doors, once closed, must never be opened again.